My name is Diana Calloway. I am 49 years old. I never thought a single text message could unravel 24 years of marriage. But that Wednesday evening, standing in my own kitchen, I learned exactly how quiet betrayal can be, until the moment it decides not to be anymore. The kitchen smelled of garlic and rosemary. The kind of smell that means home, that means ordinary, that means safe. My husband James had been in the shower for his usual 40 minutes. I had just finished clearing the table when his phone lit up on the counter where he always left it. The screen glowed in the low light of the kitchen. The message was from a number I did not recognize. It read, "I keep thinking about last week. I have not stopped." My hand stopped moving. The cloth I had been using dangled from my fingers. My heart did not race. It simply stopped. Then it started again, one heavy beat at a time, catching up to something my body already understood before. My mind had formed a single coherent thought. I do not go through people's phones. I never have. I believe privacy matters, even in a marriage, perhaps especially in a marriage. But in that moment, standing in the kitchen I had cooked in every evening for 2 decades, something shifted inside me in a way that felt permanent and irreversible. I picked up the phone. His passcode was still our wedding anniversary. It took me 4 seconds. I opened the messages. I read enough. Not everything. Just enough to understand the shape of what I was looking at. And then my thumbs moved before I had consciously decided to allow them to. I typed, "Come now." "He is at the office." I sent it. The regret arrived immediately, cold and physical. But the message was already delivered. I set the phone back exactly where I had found it. The angle, the slight turn toward the fruit bowl, everything precisely as it had been. I listened. The shower ran. The clock on the kitchen wall marked seconds. The refrigerator made its low, indifferent hum. I sat down on the stool at the island, folded my hands in my lap. My face in the dark window across from me looked like a woman. I recognized but did not entirely know. Calm eyes, still expression. A stranger's composure on a face I had been looking at for 49 years. I counted 14 minutes. Then the doorbell rang. If you have ever been the person in the room who already knows, stay with me. Subscribe if you are new here. I post every week and I read every single comment. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Now let me take you back to how we got here. James and I married when I was 25. He ran a small architectural consultancy that had grown steadily into something genuinely impressive over the years. I had my own career, project management for a property development firm, work I was good at and genuinely enjoyed. We had built our life together, the way people build things when they are both paying attention, carefully, incrementally, with the shared understanding that effort was not optional. Our son Marcus was 23. Our daughter, Leila, had just turned 20 and was in her 2nd year at university 4 hours away. The house had been fuller when they were young. Now it was often just James and me, and I had told myself that was a different kind of contentment, quieter but no less real. Vivian Ashby had been in our lives for 3 years. She was 47, recently divorced, elegant in the particular way of a woman who had learned to use elegance as armor. She had come into our world through the architecture community, a property consultant who worked with several of James's clients. She had attended dinners at our house. She had sat in the chair across from mine at the table I laid for guests. She had asked me about Leila's course and remembered my mother's name. That last detail was the one that would stay with me longest. Not the messages I had seen on James's phone. Not the way her name appeared in his calendar under descriptions that did not quite add up. The fact that she had asked about my mother, with what seemed like genuine interest, and had remembered the answer. I had trusted her the way you trust people you have invited into your ordinary life, without calculation, without evidence to the contrary, the way trust works until it does not. I had not seen it coming. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I was not a woman who had been quietly suspicious for years. I had not been storing doubts in some private drawer, adding to them week by week. The text message on Wednesday evening was the first thing. Everything after it came from that. The doorbell rang on the 14th minute. I walked to the front door at my own pace, smoothed my cardigan, opened it. Vivienne stood on my porch in a light coat, her hair down, wearing the kind of makeup that suggests an occasion. She looked exactly like a woman who had not expected to see me. The color left her face in a single moment. Not gradually, all at once. "Where is James?" she said. The words hung between us. I stepped back from the door. "Come in." She hesitated for only a second before crossing the threshold. Her heels clicked softly on the hallway floor. I could smell her perfume. Something expensive, that I recognized from the last time. She had sat at my dinner table. The recognition was its own small cruelty. I closed the door behind her with a quiet click. We stood in the sitting room. Neither of us moved toward a chair. The silence extended between us. Upstairs, the shower stopped. Footsteps crossed the bathroom floor. James came down the stairs in his gray shirt and the joggers he always changed. Into after work, his hair still damp. He reached the landing and stopped. His eyes moved from me to Vivienne and back. What I saw on his face was not shock. It was calculation dressed as shock. He knew immediately what had happened. He was already deciding what to say. "Diane," he said, using my name the way people use names when they need a moment to think. I did not answer him. I watched Vivienne instead, the way she glanced at him. The small, silent exchange between them. They had rehearsed this moment in their minds, I understood. Perhaps not this specific version, but a confrontation that had been anticipated and planned around. They had agreed on what to say if this happened. I could see the shape of it in the way neither of them was genuinely panicking. This was not a secret that had been carelessly kept. It had been carefully maintained. That was the thing I understood. Standing in my own sitting room, watching my husband and my former guest find their footing, James descended the last few steps. "Diane, this is not what you are thinking." I did not say anything. Vivienne touched the collar of her coat, composing herself. She said we should all talk properly, like adults. I studied them both. The careful distance they maintained, the way their eyes met for a fraction of a second, looking for alignment. My voice came out level, almost gentle. "How long have you both been waiting for me to step aside?" The question landed. James shifted his weight. Vivienne's expression tightened. For the first time, neither of them had an immediate answer. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily in the quiet. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The steam from James's shower still hung faintly in the air. Vivienne's perfume was in the room now, mixing with it. Everything that had made the house, ordinary an hour ago, had been contaminated by the presence of something that had been here long before I knew it. I thought about the photos on the walls, the children's things still in their rooms, the life I had maintained in these rooms across 24 years, and I felt the full weight of it, not as grief yet, but as information, as data. The kind my professional mind had always known how to process. Vivienne began to say something about misunderstandings. I raised one hand slightly, not commanding, just enough. James was in the shower, I said. His phone received a message. "Now you are here." James ran a hand through his damp hair. "Diane, please, let us not make this worse than it needs to be." I met his eyes. Those eyes I had been looking at across every kind of table this house had to offer for 24 years. "I am not making it worse, James. I am just no longer making it easier." Vivienne moved toward the door, clearly wanting to leave, held back only by the particular awkwardness of having nowhere graceful to go. In her movement, a small envelope slipped from her coat pocket onto the floor near the side table. She did not notice. I watched it fall and said nothing. After she had left, I picked it up. Inside were printed pages, property details for a flat registered to a company name I did not recognize. My fingers tightened on the paper. James stood near the door, still damp from the shower that had started all of this. For the first time in years, I looked at my husband and felt something I had not expected. Not rage, clarity. James closed the front door after Vivienne. The latch clicked with a particular finality. He turned to face me. "This is not what you think," he said. "Vivienne and I have been talking. That is all. She is going through a difficult time. I have been a support to her." "Talking," I said. I let the word sit where it landed. He took a step toward me. Hands open. The gesture of a man presenting himself as reasonable. We should sit down. Discuss this like adults. There is Vivian's phrase again. They had coordinated their language too. How long have you both been preparing for this conversation? He hesitated. A few months. It became something more than I intended. But Diane, our marriage has been stalling for years. You know that. We have both known it. The words arrived like stones dropped into still water. I looked at his face for guilt. I found discomfort. I found some rehearsed regret. What I did not find was surprise. He had already built the narrative. The distant wife. The lonely man. The inevitable drift that absolves both of them of deliberate choice. She knows things about me, I said quietly. Where I visit my mother on Tuesdays. That Leila is 4 hours away. Which side of the bed you sleep on. He rubbed the back of his neck. The gesture he made when he was cornered. You are overreading this. Vivienne is a friend to both of us. She lost her marriage. She understands when a relationship becomes routine. Routine. I walked to the kitchen, poured water from the tap, and drank it slowly. He followed. His phone still sat on the island where it had started this evening. How long have you both been waiting for me to step aside? He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time that evening, I watched the calculation behind his eyes become briefly visible. He had already imagined a life without me. He had already furnished the flat in those printed pages. He had already told himself a version of events in which he was not the architect of what he was about to do, simply a man who had been pulled towards something unavoidable. We did not plan to hurt you, he said finally, but people change. Perhaps it is time we acknowledged that honestly. I set the glass down on the counter without any force. I'm not making this harder for you, James. I am simply refusing to make it easier. He softened his voice. We do not need to do this tonight. The children do not need to be pulled into it. We can handle this privately and sensibly. His eyes moved for a fraction of a second to my cardigan pocket. He did not know I had the envelope. Not yet. I thought about Marcus, 23, and beginning to understand what adult life actually costs. I thought about Leila, 4 hours away, trusting that her parents' house was still the place she understood it to be. The idea of what this would do to them tightened something in my chest, but something else steadied me equally. The truth. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been built behind my back before. I decided what to do with any of it. Go to bed, James, I said. We both need to think clearly. He waited for the confrontation he had prepared himself for. When it did not arrive, he went upstairs. I listened to his footsteps cross the bedroom floor above me. Then I sat at the kitchen island and pulled out the envelope. Under the kitchen light, I read about a flat they had been viewing together. Deposit notes, a draft timeline, a handwritten line in James's script at the bottom of one page. Dee will need time to process. Wait until Leila is settled for the year. I read that line 3 times. They had timed this around our daughter's academic calendar. They had looked at a window in which both children would be, absorbed elsewhere, and had built their exit strategy around it. I sat with that information for a long time in the kitchen that still smelled of garlic and rosemary. Then I photographed every page with my phone. Careful angles, clear light, no trembling. The next morning, James left for work with his usual kiss on my cheek and his tie slightly wrong the way it always was on mornings he was distracted. I let the door close behind him. Then I began. Our finances were partly shared and partly separate. I had always maintained my own account. What I found in the shared records over the following 2 hours was a series of regular transfers to a company called Ashby Solutions. James had mentioned it once, casually, over dinner months ago, a financial consultancy Vivian had recommended. Useful for the business, he had said. The company linked back to Vivian. Her name on filings, her listed address. The transfers were not enormous, but they were consistent and they had been ongoing for over a year. Our joint account, our money. I screenshotted everything. Then I went to James's home study. The room smelled of his cologne and old paper. I went through the drawers methodically and without rushing. Inside a folder beneath several unrelated documents, I found what I had not been looking for, but was no longer surprised to find. Printed pages of the same flat from the envelope. Deposit schedules, a draft separation document dated 6 weeks. Earlier, with our assets roughly divided in James's handwriting, and a note on a separate sheet. Diane will need time. Wait until Leila is settled in for autumn term. I read the date. It matched Leila's move-in week at university. I sat in my husband's chair and looked out through his study window at the garden we had planted together the year Marcus was born. I did not cry. I photographed every page. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I called my oldest friend, Patricia. She answered on the second ring. "You sound like something has happened," she said. I told her everything. The text message, Vivienne at the door, the envelope, the folder, the note about Leila. Patricia had been through her own divorce 11 years ago. She had learned things the hard way that she now passed on without softening. "Men like James do not fear tears," she said when I finished. "They fear paperwork. Document everything. Do not leave the house. And do not confront him until you have spoken to someone who knows what they are doing." She gave me a name. Harriet Cole, a family law solicitor she described as old school, sharp and entirely uninterested in drama. "Tell her I sent you." I called that afternoon. "Subscribe if you are still with me," because what I found when I sat across from Harriet changed the way I understood every decision I needed to make. Harriet. Cole's office was on the 3rd floor of a quiet building near the town center. She was in her late 50s, with short silver hair and the particular steady gaze of someone who has heard every version of this particular story and can tell in the first 5 minutes which version she is hearing now. She did not offer false sympathy. She reviewed the photographs. I had brought on my phone and asked 2 or 3 precise questions. Then she looked up. "Do you want to punish him?" she said. "Or do you want to protect yourself?" "Both," I said. "But protection first." She nodded. "The transfers to Ashby Solutions from a joint account can work significantly in your favor during asset division. The premeditation in those notes, the timing around your daughter's departure, demonstrates intent. That matters." She laid out the immediate steps clearly. "Continue documenting. Stay in the house. Do not sign anything he puts in front of you. Do not reveal how much you know. Let him believe you are still processing. The more comfortable he becomes, the more he will reveal." I left her office with a cleaner mind than I had entered it with. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. That evening, James came home with flowers. Cream roses, my favorite once. He set them on the counter with a careful smile. "I hated last night," he said. "I still care about you deeply, Diane. I want us to handle this with dignity." I accepted the flowers and put them in water. "Thank you," I said simply. He watched my face for the fracture he expected. I gave him nothing. That night I lay in the dark beside him and listened to him breathe. The flat in those printed pages was in my mind. The note about waiting for Leila. They had turned our marriage into a managed timeline, a project with a planned completion date. I was not going to let them write the ending. Over the following week, James tried different approaches. Flowers twice more. Takeout from the restaurant we had gone to on our first date. Long, careful conversations about how marriages evolved and how sometimes 2 people grew in separate directions, without it being anyone's fault. I listened. I noted every calibrated phrase. I added observations to a private document each evening. The way he checked his phone when he thought I was not watching. The sudden new interest in asking about my mother's health. The way he mentioned Leila casually, as if testing whether she had said anything. Leila called on a Thursday evening. "Mom," she said, "Dad texted me this week asking if I thought you might be happier back near Grandma's for a while. He made it sound like you were the one thinking about space. Is something going on?" The floor shifted slightly under me. He was already working on the children's understanding, planting the version of events in which I was the one who needed distance. "We are working through some things," I told her. "Your dad and I have been together a long time. Do not worry. Focus on your work. I love you." After the call, I stood at the kitchen window and understood the full shape of what was happening. James was not just leaving. He was arranging for me to be the one who appeared to have already moved on. The distant wife who needed space from her marriage, who might be happier near her mother. It was patient and it was precise, and it had been in motion for considerably longer than a few months. I met Harriet again the following week. She reviewed my new documentation and was satisfied. "You are doing this correctly," she said. "Stay in place. Gather more where you can. When the time comes, we will be ready. What comes next is already decided. The question is simply where you choose to make it visible." I thought about that. Where you choose to make it visible. James's company was marking its 25th anniversary in 2 weeks. A formal dinner at the golf club. Colleagues and clients and old friends. The kind of evening that mattered to James in the way that public standing always had. He asked me to attend. We needed to show a united front, he said. For the business. For stability. I agreed quietly. And I already knew, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, that this was the room Harriet had been referring to. I prepared carefully, a navy dress, the pearl earrings James had given me on our 20th anniversary. In my small evening bag, I placed a thin envelope containing the documents I had selected, the bank transfer records, the flat details, a photograph of the handwritten note. Not everything, enough. The club dining room was decorated with arrangements of white and green, long tables set for 60, laughter and the sounds of glasses. James stayed close to me through cocktails, his hand occasionally at my back. A performance for everyone watching. Our children were not there. James had suggested they might find a formal business dinner dull. I had agreed without argument. Vivian was there in a burgundy dress, her hair arranged carefully. Her official role was event consultant. Her eyes met mine across the room when we arrived. She offered a polite nod. I returned it with nothing. When dinner was served, James took the small stage near the far wall. The room settled. He looked completely at ease. Tall, silver-haired, the picture of a man who had built something real over a long time. 25 years, he began, his voice warm through the microphone. None of this would have been possible without the steadiness of my wife Diane, who has stood beside me through everything this company has asked of us. Applause moved through the room. I sat with my hands in my lap. The envelope rested in my bag. He continued, "Marriages, like businesses, go through seasons. Sometimes life invites us to make changes that are honest and brave, to step into new chapters with integrity." He was doing it publicly, framing the separation in the language of mutual growth. A few people at nearby tables exchanged glances. The story was already moving through the room before he had finished saying it. The Callaways were separating gracefully, two mature adults making considered choices together. Vivian stood near the side of the room with an expression I recognized. The expression of a woman who believes something has already been decided in her favor. I stood up. Chairs do not scrape on carpet, but mine shifted slightly and heads turned. James paused mid-step as he came away from the microphone. I walked to the front, my heels quiet on the floor, the envelope in my hand. The room went still with the particular anticipation of people who understand that something unscheduled is happening. I stopped at the microphone. I looked out at the room. Faces I had known for years. Business partners. Old friends. People who had attended our wedding. Before my husband finishes talking about new chapters, I said, "I think the people in this room should understand who has been writing them." James took a step forward. I continued. "I am not here to make a scene," I said. "I am here to share what actually happened." I opened the envelope. I held up the first page briefly. Bank transfers from our joint account to a company registered to Vivian Ashby, running for 14 months. I set it down. The next page. A flat they had been viewing together. A deposit placed 3 months ago. And this, I said, holding up the last page. A note in my husband's handwriting that reads, "Diane will need time to process. Wait until Leila is settled for autumn term." The silence in the room was complete. Vivian had gone pale near the side wall. James stood motionless, his hand closed at his side. I set the documents on the stand beside the microphone. I do not need anyone in this room to choose a side tonight. I simply need you all to remember what actually took place. The rest will be handled privately. James reached the microphone. He spoke in the tone of a man attempting to manage a situation. "Diane is understandably upset," he said. "This is a private family matter and not the place for—" "No, James," I said, still calm, still even. I interrupted him without raising my voice. "You chose this room to talk about honest change. Now the room knows what that change actually looked like. He gripped the edge of the stand. This is humiliating. I looked at him directly. Humiliating is finding a note in your husband's handwriting about timing your exit around your daughter's first week at university. This is simply accuracy. The words landed without venom. Patricia, who had come as my guest, moved calmly to position herself near the side exit where Vivian was beginning to drift. I heard her say something quiet. Vivian stopped. I returned to my seat. The applause from his speech had gone entirely. In its place was the low, continuous sound of 60 people beginning to process what they had just witnessed. Phones were visible at several tables. The story was moving now, but on terms I had set. James stood alone in the light near the front of the room. For the first time in 24 years, he looked like a man who had lost the ability to manage what people were thinking about him. Vivian slipped out through a side door when Patricia stepped back to let her pass. I did not attempt to stop her. She was not the central problem. Several guests approached me before the evening ended. Quiet words, hands on my arm. Others avoided my eye, uncertain how to navigate the fracture they had just witnessed. I understood. Change this sharp leaves everyone temporarily without their footing. James came to me as the room emptied, his face pale. We need to talk at home. I gathered my bag. We will, I said. But tonight Marcus is picking me up and we are going to sit together and I'm going to tell my son what happened. Tomorrow we will talk. He stood there with nowhere to put himself. The confident man who had stood at that microphone 20 minutes ago looked like someone who had left something essential in the room and could not go back for it. Marcus drove us home. The car was quiet. When we pulled into the driveway, I made tea and we sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where this had started, and I told him what he needed to know. Not everything. The essential shape of it. He sat with it for a long time. Then he said, "You should have called me when you found out." I said I needed to be ready first. He nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." He stayed the night. He slept in his old room. And for the first time in several weeks, the house felt inhabited rather than occupied. Leila called the next morning. Marcus had messaged her gently the previous evening. "Mom," she said when I answered. Her voice was careful and steady in the way I recognized as inherited. "Are you all right?" "I am," I said. "I am better than I have been in a while, actually." "Dad texted me again last night," she said. "Something about you being under stress." I did not reply to him. "That is fine," I said. "You do not have to." I met with Harriet the following week, and we began the formal process. Protective orders on the finances, temporary arrangements while proceedings were structured. She reminded me, as she had the first time, that the goal was not destruction. The goal was clarity, and a fair outcome arrived at on honest terms. James moved out 6 weeks later. He looked older, carrying boxes to his car than he had at any point in our marriage. Part of me mourned that. I will not pretend otherwise. But I did not mourn the version of him that had written that note about Leila's first week at university. The divorce took time. They always do. The financial evidence I had, documented early, proved significant when it came to asset division. Harriet had been right about that. Vivian sent a long email 3 weeks after the dinner, carefully worded, positioning herself as a woman who had found herself caught in something that had grown beyond her intention. I read it once and forwarded it to Harriet. James eventually sold his share of the consultancy and moved to a different city. I heard this secondhand and felt very little about it. The house is mine in a way it was not before. Not because I won it in a settlement, though the terms were fair. Because I am in it alone, which turned out to feel considerably lighter than I had expected. Leila visited for a weekend 3 months after everything had settled. We sat on the back step in the last of the autumn light with tea, and she said, "I am proud of how you handled it. You were so calm." I said I was terrified. She said, "I know. That is what made it calm." Marcus comes by regularly, sometimes without calling first, which is its own kind of comfort. On a quiet evening, I stood at the kitchen window, the same window I had stood at through so many different versions of my own life. And I thought about the text, message that had lit up a phone on a granite, counter on an ordinary Wednesday. I thought about the doorbell 14 minutes later and the woman standing on my porch expecting an empty house. The betrayal had been real, and it had been deliberate, and it had been built across more time than I had known. All of that was true. Also true was this. The moment I stopped trying to manage someone else's comfort at the expense of my own, clarity was the moment I began to understand what I was actually made of. I had stayed calm not because I felt calm, but because I understood that the truth did not need my emotion attached to it. It needed to be documented and witnessed, and said out loud in a room full of people who would remember it. James had spent months preparing to rewrite our story. He had simply not prepared for the possibility that I would write the last chapter myself. Sometimes the doorbell does not bring the person who destroys your life. Sometimes it brings the moment you finally stop letting your life be managed by someone who does not deserve that kind of access to it. If you have stayed with me all the way to the end, tell me where you are watching from tonight. And if you have ever had to stay quiet and steady while something enormous changed, tell me about it in the comments. You are not alone. Subscribe if you are not already here. There are more stories waiting. I will see you next time.